I recently sat down with an American software engineer who had just relocated to Copenhagen. And when the topic of his first Danish paycheck came up, his whole demeanor it shifted.
Oh, I can imagine.
He looked physically pained, almost offended. He pulls up the digital pay stub on his phone, zooms right in on the deductions line until it fills the whole screen. 56%, he whispered. And he was staring at me like I'd just witnessed a robbery.
The sticker shock, it's real.
It was everything. He was fixated on that number, practically vibrating with indignation. To him, this was simple math. The government was confiscating more than half of his labor. He kept saying he was being fleeced, talking about how much richer he'd be back in the States.
Right.
But then the conversation took this really strange turn. I asked him about his weekend. He casually mentions his daughter had fallen off her bike, needed urgent care, stitches, the works. Now, in the U.S., that story usually ends with a rant about deductibles or fighting insurance companies.
Absolutely. A multi-$1,000 bill. Easy.
Here. He just shrugged. He said, we just walked out. No bill, no paperwork, no credit card swipe, nothing.
Wow.
Then he mentions his wife is going back to school. And he says it offhandedly, that she was actually getting paid a monthly stipend to get her degree.
And that's the other side of the coin.
Exactly. That moment, that collision between his anger at the tax rate and his obvious relief at the lifestyle, it was fascinating to watch. He was furious about the cost of the subscription, yet he was completely addicted to the service.
That's a great way to put it.
It just revealed this profound disconnect in how we define wealth. He was calculating his net worth based on the dollars in his account, completely ignoring this massive invisible asset of having zero existential dread about his family's survival. It forces you to ask a difficult question. Is true freedom about keeping every cent you earn? Or is it about never having to worry about what happens if you lose it? That collision is exactly what we are diving into today. We are peeling back the layers of the Danish social model, often held up as this gold standard of welfare states, to understand how it sustains itself economically in a hyper-competitive global market. Our mission is to really analyze this apparent paradox. How does a seemingly unsustainable mix of high taxes and generous public services manage to deliver both an exceptionally high quality of life and sustained economic robustness?
It's a perfect framing because the central puzzle of the Danish system is why it works at all. I mean, from the perspective of strict classical economic theory,
Right.
A system with marginal tax rates hitting over 50%,
Right.
some of the most generous unemployment benefits globally, and a public sector that accounts for, over 25% of total employment? It should logically lead to reduced work incentive, capital flight,
Stagnation.
economic stagnation. We call it the flying bumblebee model. It shouldn't be able to fly, but it does.
And the proof is in the global metrics. This high-cost, high-service model doesn't just survive, it thrives.
Exactly. I mean, look at the rankings. The World Bank consistently places Denmark among the top countries for ease of doing business. It's often third globally.
Third.
Its overall economic competitiveness ranks 10th in the world. And in terms of societal well-being, the Nordic countries just consistently dominate the World Happiness Report, with Denmark usually hovering at first or second place. These are not the statistics of a sluggish, failing economy.
No.
The success demands a comprehensive explanation.
To understand the core of this economic sustainability, we need to move past that simple, visible tax rate and look at the underlying structures that create this wealth and stability. It's a system, not just a single policy.
Precisely. We can break the Danish model down into 3 synergistic and mutually dependent pillars that explain the success. And we need to understand the function and the tension within each.
Okay.
First, there is Flexicurity, which governs the highly dynamic labor market. Second, there is education, which serves as the foundational investment in human capital and social mobility.
And third,
there is redistribution through progressive tax and comprehensive welfare, which provides the necessary social safety net and, crucially, fosters trust.
And crucially, we aren't just here to admire the structure. I mean, given that anecdote about the software engineer's sudden relief after the emergency room visit, we need to understand the engine's power source. But we also have to look closely at where the structure is being stressed, where the cracks starting to appear due to recent cuts and demographic realities.
That's the critical objective. Recent decades of policy changes, particularly cost-cutting measures and rising demographic pressure, are testing the fundamental balance of these pillars, risking the unique synergy that allows the bumblebee to stay airborne.
So let's start by mapping out those 3 core pillars that underpin this surprisingly successful Danish social model: Flexicurity, education, and redistribution. They operate as a sophisticated, interlocking economic engine.
Think of it this way. Danish society manages risk collectively. These three pillars just manage different facets of that risk.
Right. So if you break it down, Flexicurity is the system that manages market risk and the risk of job loss. It demands market agility, but it provides immediate security.
And education is the long-term investment that manages competency risk. By providing free, high-quality education to everyone, regardless of background, the economy guarantees a continuously highly skilled workforce, which justifies the high wages and taxes.
While redistribution is the mechanism that manages catastrophic life risk, illness, old age, failure, and crucially, it's what finances the whole system, while ensuring that the gains from growth are distributed broadly enough to foster social cohesion.
It is truly a closed-loop system. The high taxes fund the education and the safety net. The education provides the skilled labor for a competitive economy. And the safety net allows workers to accept the highly flexible nature of the labor market. If you weaken one, you immediately strain the others.
For example?
For example, if the education system declines, the workforce becomes less competitive, and fewer people can afford to pay the high taxes needed for the safety net. It's all connected.
Okay, let's unpack that first pillar then. Flexicurity. This is where we analyze the logic that makes a high-tax environment competitive. It's this essential compromise between the employer's need for agility and the employee's need for security.
It is the paradox itself. How can Denmark boast high employment rates, around 75.5% for working-age people, well above the OECD average, and rapid reemployment alongside some of the most generous unemployment benefits globally?
The idea that this combination should result in mass unemployment is almost a textbook certainty in certain economic circles.
Yet, the system works because it enforces a necessary trade-off captured in the Flexicurity triad: flexibility, the safety net, and active labor market policy, or ALMP.
Let's start with the flexibility aspect, which seems to favor the employers.
Absolutely. Danish employment protection laws are famously minimal. Unlike many European countries, there are very low hurdles for laying off workers, and notice periods are relatively short.
So it's easy to hire and fire?
Very. This places Denmark among the most flexible labor markets in the world. For employers, this is a massive advantage. They can quickly adapt their workforce to shifts in technology, demand, or market downturns without lengthy, expensive legal battles. This fluidity means that job openings are created rapidly, and labor can be recycled efficiently.
But again, this sounds terrifying for the worker. Why don't workers insist on strong job protection laws?
Because of the second component, the safety net. This is the employee's compensation for accepting minimal job protection. If you become unemployed, the system immediately kicks in. Workers receive benefits that can replace up to 90% of their previous salary, although these payments are capped. This benefit package can last for up to 2 years. Crucially, this benefit is the institutional replacement for traditional job security. The worker is insured against unemployment.
So if a high-tech company, say, the one that hired the engineer in Copenhagen, needs to scale down quickly, the employees accept it because they know their income stream won't just vanish. It removes that existential risk of being fired.
Exactly. The generous benefit level gives employees the psychological security to accept the rapid churn and market flexibility. If this net weren't seamless and generous, employees would immediately lobby for increased severance pay, longer notice periods,
All the things that gum up the works.
and complex legal barriers to dismissal. That would instantly erode the flexibility, making Denmark less competitive.
That makes perfect sense. But let's turn to the classical criticism. If the benefits are so high, up to 90% replacement, what stops people from simply choosing unemployment? This is the core of the sedative effect argument.
And that's where the third and perhaps most distinct component comes into play: active labor market policy, or ALMP. The Danish welfare state does not provide passive benefits. Benefits are strictly conditional on activation.
Activation?
Unemployed workers are required to participate aggressively in retraining and job search activities.
What does this activation look like in practice? What are the specific requirements?
It is highly rigorous, and this sets Denmark apart even from its Nordic neighbors. When a person becomes unemployed, they are immediately enrolled in an ALMP program facilitated by local job centers. They are required to meet stringent, measurable requirements.
Like what?
Like sending out a specified high number of job applications per week, attending mandatory counseling sessions, and crucially, participating in tailor-made training and education programs designed to bridge specific skill gaps identified by the job centers.
So it's not just checking a box. It's intensive, government-mandated upskilling.
Precisely. Denmark leads the entire OECD in expenditure on active labor market policies as a share of GDP. This investment is not just social spending, it's an economic investment designed to boost productivity and reduce the duration of unemployment.
And the threat of losing benefits is the stick that makes it work.
That enforcement mechanism, the threat of benefits being cut if the worker doesn't participate, is what invalidates this sedative effect theory in practice. High benefits combined with stringent activation requirements effectively galvanize the unemployed back into the workforce.
Let's look at the hard data proving this efficiency. How quickly do they get people reemployed?
The efficiency metrics are world-class. Denmark ranks highest in the EU for reemploying workers from one quarter to the next. The system ensures that unemployment is typically a short-term transition, not a long-term trap.
A trap, right?
Only about 20% of unemployed workers are considered long-term, meaning unemployed for a year or more, which is a significantly lower figure than most of Europe. And what's more, the model has proven incredibly resilient during global economic shocks. Even during the 2008 financial crisis, while unemployment certainly rose, the increase in long-term unemployment in Denmark was relatively moderate compared to other EU countries that relied on job preservation policies.
Interesting.
The dynamic market, fueled by ALMP, just quickly absorbed the shocks by recycling workers into emerging sectors.
We need to mention the unique organization of the labor market, too. It's not just a government program, it's a social contract maintained by workers and employers.
That's a vital distinction. The Flexicurity model was largely forged and maintained by the social partners, the trade unions and employer associations alongside the state. It relies on a high degree of organization. Nearly 70% of employees are union members.
Which is extraordinarily high.
It is.
Why is that high unionization critical to Flexicurity?
Because it enables coordinated bargaining. Even though wage negotiations are decentralized, happening at the sector or company level, they are coordinated across the national economy.
And that leads to?
That coordination results in less wage dispersion, meaning the gap between the highest and lowest earners is narrower. This collective strength ensures that the added growth benefits everyone, not just the wealthiest, which is fundamental to maintaining social cohesion and low overall unemployment, particularly benefiting vulnerable or low-skilled groups. This coordinated cooperation is much harder to achieve in less unionized systems.
This sounds like a masterfully engineered machine. But if we are to conduct a true deep dive, we have to critically challenge the model. Doesn't this high flexibility and coordinated bargaining inherently lead to wage compression, making it harder for unions to protect workers in specific high-skill industries from downward wage pressure?
That is an excellent point. And while the coordination successfully reduces inequality, there is evidence that it can create challenges for certain highly specialized high-wage sectors. However, the Danish solution to this pressure has often been to rely heavily on the third pillar education, to continuously boost productivity across the entire workforce, justifying the high wages collectively, rather than relying on sectoral wage battles. The real stress point, however, is the recent weakening of the pillars themselves due to cost cutting.
So let's identify where Flexicurity is being compromised.
Firstly, the safety net has suffered significant deliberate cuts. The replacement rate, the proportion of lost income covered by benefits, has been steadily eroded.
How much?
For an average worker, the replacement rate stood at about 62.5% of salary in 1994. By 2025, it is projected to drop to around 50%.
That's a 20% reduction in the promised life insurance payout over 3 decades. That drastically changes the fundamental trade-off of the model.
It fundamentally reduces the security pillar. The eligibility period for receiving benefits has also been shortened. The consequence is severe. Analysis suggests that approximately 7,000 individuals risk falling entirely through the gaps in the system every year.
7,000 a year.
If the insurance against unemployment becomes inadequate, the core reason for accepting market flexibility just vanishes.
And secondly, the activation pillar, the ALMP, has also faced cuts.
Yes. Between 2017 and 2020, a political agreement removed 1 billion DKK from employment efforts. To give that context for a global listener, DKK 1 billion is roughly equivalent to 140 million US dollars.
And that's a big chunk of the budget.
It represented a 20% reduction of the operating expenses for active labor market policy at the municipal level in just 3 years.
So they are weakening both sides of the contract, reducing the payout, the safety net, and reducing the investment in reemployment, the ALMP.
That's the critical threat. If the safety net feels insufficient, workers lose trust in the security provided. The inevitable reaction is already observable in collective bargaining agreements. Unions are increasingly demanding increased employment protection.
Like higher severance pay and longer notice periods.
Exactly. If these demands are met, the flexibility pillar is damaged, leading to a more rigid, less dynamic labor market and undermining the very efficiency that makes Denmark competitive. The system requires full investment in all three parts to fly.
The weakening of flexicurity makes the second pillar, education, even more critical. I mean, education is the long-term investment that ensures the economy can continue to operate in a high-cost, high-wage environment. If Denmark can't compete on price, it has to compete on knowledge and skill.
Education is the definitive cornerstone of the entire welfare state. Its structural commitment is absolute. Education is completely free, from primary school all the way through specialized vocational training and university degrees. This universal access is the primary engine of equal opportunity.
We have to elaborate on the student support system, because that's the part of the original anecdote that shocked the engineer, his wife getting paid to study.
That is the SU, or Statens Danish State Educational Support. It is a monthly stipend provided by the government to all university students, regardless of parental income.
Regardless.
The purpose is unambiguous: to remove any financial barrier to higher education and allow students to focus fully on their studies, rather than needing to work 20 or 30 hours a week just to pay tuition and rent.
This stipend is crucial for social mobility.
It is. By removing the financial pressure, it ensures that students from low-income families have the same opportunity to achieve academic success as those from high-income families.
So how effective is this at leveling the playing field compared to places like the United States, where student debt is just a massive barrier?
The results are compelling. Data consistently shows that social background has minimal impact on educational opportunity in Denmark compared to many OECD countries.
We'll see the numbers.
Okay, let's look at the specific data on upper secondary education completion rates. If we compare the completion rate between young people whose parents hold a degree and those whose parents don't, the difference in completion rate in Denmark is only 17 percentage points.
And in the U.S., that difference is almost double.
Correct. The difference in the U.S. is 29 percentage points.
Wow.
This gap demonstrates that family wealth and background are significantly less deterministic of a child's educational outcome in Denmark.
Wow.
And furthermore, if your parents have a higher education degree, your odds of achieving one yourself are roughly 5 times greater in Denmark. In the United States, those odds jump to 10 times greater.
So the famous quote rings true. If you want to live the American dream, you should move to Denmark. The data backs up that massive state investment in education directly correlates with high intergenerational income mobility.
It's a direct function of the system. This widespread, high-quality education helps flatten income disparity later in life. There is a close correlation globally between the distribution of competence, measured by metrics like math and literacy attainment among adults, and the income distribution in society.
Right.
By raising the skill floor for the entire population, Denmark inherently creates a more even and robust distribution of income.
This high-skill foundation is why Denmark can sustain high wages and compete on innovation rather than cheap labor. But you mentioned a worrying tendency here too, investment decline.
Yes, and this is highly alarming given the critical nature of this pillar. Despite its documented success, Denmark has been dropping in education spending rankings. Since 2010, public expenditure on education, measured as a share of GDP, has declined by 0.5%.
Let's contextualize that decline, because 0.5% sounds abstract.
In real terms, that represents a massive disinvestment of 10.7 billion DKK over a decade.
Which is,
to put that into familiar terms, that's roughly 1.5 billion US dollars in real terms, removed from the education budget. The cuts became institutionalized through a mandatory measure called the reprioritization contribution.
the reprioritization contribution. That sounds like political jargon for a fixed cut. What did that entail?
It was essentially a mandatory 2% annual cost-cutting effort imposed on state-funded institutions, upper secondary schools, universities, etc.
2% every year.
These forced savings on upper secondary and higher education totaled over 4 billion DKK, around 560 million US dollars by 2021. When you mandate continuous 2% cuts year after year, institutions that typically spend over 75% of their budget on salaries have no choice but to reduce staff.
That means reducing teachers and increasing class sizes, directly impacting quality.
Exactly. public sector sources are screaming warnings. Teachers and principals across the country have protested, stating that this continuous saving mandate is pushing the educational system toward a breaking point. They are forced to reduce the number of teachers, support staff, and resources, which inevitably strains the quality of the education delivered.
Beyond the quality strain, what are the broader societal risks if the quality of the free public education system deteriorates?
The long-term risk is the fragmentation of social cohesion, which directly threatens the high social trust underpinning the entire Danish model. We are already observing an increased social divide risk. Fewer public schools are socially mixed, and more families are shifting their children to private schools, which often serve a more homogeneous high-income demographic.
Right, the bubble effect.
If this trend continues, Denmark risks losing the crucial classmate effect, where children from less resourced backgrounds benefit significantly from being educated alongside high-resource, high-aspiration students. This bifurcation of the school system increases mutual misunderstanding across social classes, making the shared sacrifices, like the 56% tax rate, much harder to accept in the future.
And you also mentioned geographical contraction.
Yes. The cuts have driven a physical contraction of educational opportunities. The number of municipalities offering short or medium-cycle tertiary education has decreased significantly. We are looking at reductions of 32% and 25% respectively.
So it's becoming more centralized in the big cities.
Exactly. This is antithetical to the goal of universal access. If educational opportunities cluster solely in the biggest cities, it reinforces social and geographical inequality. Students in rural or less populated areas either have to incur high costs and time traveling, or they forego education altogether. This directly weakens the ladder of social mobility, making the system less equitable and less efficient at maximizing human capital nationwide. The current trend undermines the very pillar that justifies the high cost of Danish labor.
This brings us to the third and core mechanism, redistribution. This is the mechanism where high taxes are actively translated into equal opportunity, social cohesion, and the high-trust environment necessary for innovation. It's the moment where the American engineer's frustration with the 56% deduction dissolves into the relief of free urgent care.
The progressive tax system is certainly the key tool. We have to emphasize that Denmark is not inherently an equal society before taxation and transfers. In fact, based on market incomes alone, Denmark is often less equal than some of its peers, such as Norway or Switzerland.
But the progressive taxation and robust welfare transfers dramatically alter that picture.
They do. After redistribution, that 56% tax rate and the resulting transfers, the Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality, is reduced by an astonishing 42%.
For listeners who might not be economists, how do we explain what a 42% Gini reduction actually means in practical terms?
A higher Gini coefficient means greater disparity between the rich and the poor. So reducing it by 42% means Denmark moves from having a standard level of European market inequality to having virtually the lowest post-tax inequality globally.
Wow.
This reduction is achieved through highly progressive income taxes and the generous transfers we mentioned, ensuring that the working poor and those relying on benefits still receive enough income to participate in a basic social life.
Let's quantify the value received, the invisible consumption that offsets the high tax burden. This is the crucial Copenhagen calculation the engineer initially missed.
It's the hidden asset that is paid for collectively. The high tax burden finances an array of comprehensive, universal public services: healthcare, education, childcare, elder care, and cultural offerings. When researchers quantify this, they find that a remarkable 27% of Danish households' total consumption actually takes place through the welfare state's offerings.
Almost a third of an average Dane's consumption is invisible because it's prepaid via taxes.
Yeah.
Can we break down what that 27% typically covers for a family?
Absolutely. Think about what a family with 2 working parents, 2 young children, and an elderly relative in need of care would pay in the U.S. or other less socialized systems. That 27% covers the cost of
Childcare.
Universally accessible, high-quality childcare, which can cost $15,000 to $20,000 annually per child. Privately. It covers the total cost of university education for both children, including the living stipend, which eliminates hundreds of thousands in debt.
And healthcare.
Comprehensive, zero-cost access to healthcare, including emergency surgery and long-term care, and subsidized elder care services. For a family earning the median income, these costs, if paid out of pocket, would crush their disposable income. The system ensures these essential services are accessible universally, regardless of current income. For lower-income household, universal free access to high-quality public services is the only way they would obtain these services at all. By balancing consumption differences in essential services, the welfare state reduces inequality far more effectively than cash transfers alone.
And this universal provision of high-quality services builds social trust, which itself is a massive, quantifiable economic asset. This is where we touch on that high-trust environment, like the story of parents feeling safe enough to leave their infants unsupervised outside cafes.
That level of trust where social friction is minimal because everyone believes the system will support them and their neighbor. It's not just a cultural curiosity, it's an economic multiplier.
How so?
Studies confirm a powerful link between high social trust and economic performance, specifically in the realms of innovation and R&D. High trust dramatically reduces transaction costs. You need less expensive legal monitoring, fewer complex contracts, and less fear of fraud or expropriation when engaging in business.
So the high level of security provides a tolerance channel for risk-taking.
Precisely. If an innovator knows that failure doesn't mean financial ruin, they are much more likely to pursue long-term, high-risk investments, share knowledge freely with potential partners, and challenge existing business models.
Is there data on this?
There is. The data confirms this. Research shows that a 15% increase in a country's social trust is associated with a staggering 59% increase in the number of patents generated and a 55% increase in the citations those patents receive.
That is a direct correlation between social cohesion and technological innovation. The safety net, therefore, is an investment in future productivity, not just a humanitarian expense.
Absolutely. It ensures that the most talented individuals, regardless of their family's starting wealth, feel empowered to take the risk necessary to drive the economy forward. That's why the statement, "If you want to live the American dream, you should move to Denmark," is supported by data on intergenerational income mobility.
Now, we have to transition to the critical cracks in this social contract. The system is currently facing severe pressure points, particularly concerning demographics and policy choices since the early 2000s.
Inequality has been on a significant, sustained rise since 2000, and it accelerated after the global financial crisis. This is driven by two factors: policy changes making the system less progressive, and rising demographic demands on a shrinking workforce.
Okay, what's the policy shift?
First, the policy shift. Since 2001, there has been a pattern of deliberate tax cuts favoring the top earners. Total tax cuts granted amount to 52 billion DKK. That's roughly 7.3 billion US dollars.
And how did that 52 billion benefit the population?
The benefits were highly skewed. The wealthiest 10% of the population received an average yearly tax reduction of 33,000 DKK, about 4,600 US dollars.
And the bottom 10%.
In contrast, the 10% least wealthy only gained 1,000 DKK, about 140 US dollars. This is a systematic reduction in the progressivity of the tax system, disproportionately favoring the top of the income scale.
And at the same time, transfers for the most vulnerable were reduced, right?
Yes. This is where the poverty spike originates. Policy changes implemented since 2015, specifically targeting vulnerable groups, have increased poverty significantly. The introduction of the cash benefit ceiling and the 225-hour rule are key examples.
Let's unpack the mechanics of the cash benefit ceiling and the 225-hour rule, because they directly link to rising poverty.
The cash benefit ceiling sets a maximum limit on the total welfare benefits a recipient can receive, regardless of their family size or living costs. This was designed to increase work incentive.
By making work pay more.
Exactly. But the unfortunate side effect is that for large families or those in high cost of living areas, this ceiling plunges them below the effective poverty line.
And the 225-hour rule.
The 225-hour rule penalizes non-working welfare recipients who cannot document 225 hours of full-time, self-sustained employment within the previous year. If they fail to meet this threshold, their housing supplement is significantly cut.
And again, the intent was to push people to work.
It was, but the consequence has been catastrophic for families where one parent may be ill, caring for children, or facing language or integration barriers.
And the result of these cuts is measurable and tragic.
It is. These policies have led to a major spike in child poverty. Today, there are approximately 64,500 impoverished children in Denmark. This is directly contrary to the historical goal of the welfare state to eliminate poverty.
Second, we have demographic pressure, which is where the anecdote about the nursing home administrator, Elin, comes into play. Tell us about the empty chair reality in the public sector.
The welfare state is aging faster than its population is growing. Denmark is facing a demographic imbalance. The number of elderly citizens over 65 and small children requiring intensive, labor-heavy care is increasing rapidly. This drastically increases the demand for public services.
But the workforce isn't keeping up.
Exactly. The public sector workforce is shrinking relative to the population size. The number of public employees per citizen is the lowest it has been since the 1980s. This shortage is most acute in sectors like nursing, elder care, and education.
Describe the situation facing someone like Ellen, the nursing home administrator.
Imagine Ellen facing a budget that has been fixed or cut while the number of residents requiring complex care is growing. She has empty chairs in her staff room, vacant nursing and care worker positions that she simply cannot fill.
So what happens?
This forces her to reduce the quality and intensity of the care provided. Reports show, for instance, that the number of weak elderly people receiving home care assistance has nearly halved between 2007 and 2017. In childcare, teachers are quitting because mandated staff-to-child ratios are too low, making them feel ethically compromised by the quality of care they are forced to deliver.
That deterioration of service is palpable and impacts the social contract, especially for those paying the high taxes.
Precisely. If the services provided by the state, which justify the 56% tax rate, are perceived as deteriorating, the trust necessary to sustain the system starts to erode. This creates the immense risk of an 18B team society.
Explain that 18B team risk in detail.
If public services, healthcare, education, elder care are no longer viewed as universally high quality, those who can afford it, particularly the wealthy and high earners, will start opting out.
They'll go private.
They will purchase private health insurance, enroll their children in private schools, and pay for premium private elder care. If the wealthy stop buying into the communal risk insurance policy, the foundation collapses. Not only does this reduce the tax base needed to fund the remaining public services, but it destroys the social mobility guarantee.
Right.
If high-quality education and fast, reliable healthcare are only accessible via private payment, the system ceases to guarantee equal opportunity. Inequality skyrockets, and the high social trust that fuels economic innovation just dissipates.
We must also touch on the external demographic pressure related to immigration, as that is a significant factor in the fiscal stability discussion.
That is another layer of complexity. Generally, immigrants from Western countries tend to have a positive fiscal impact on the welfare state. However, the integration challenges for non-Western immigrants related to language barriers, lack of recognition of foreign qualifications, and cultural adaptation result in weaker labor market performance.
Which
results in short-term reliance on welfare benefits, leading to a large negative fiscal impact compared to native Danes, primarily due to lower employment rates and earlier retirement. The system of universal benefits, while necessary for social cohesion, is simply not designed to absorb large, rapid influxes of individuals who struggle to quickly enter the high-wage, high-skill labor market required to sustain the tax base.
And this creates ongoing fiscal pressure.
It does, which policymakers often respond to with the same cost-cutting measures that threaten the core pillars.
So, in essence, the political course being charted, tax cuts favoring the rich, coupled with underfunding of universal services, is fundamentally incompatible with maintaining the unique, high-trust social contract necessary to sustain the system, especially in the face of these demographic pressures.
It is a profound contradiction. You cannot maintain a high-cost, high-service model if you continuously defund the services and reduce the progressivity of the funding mechanism. The Danish system only works if the investment in human capital, which is education, and the guarantee of security, which is flexicurity and redistribution, remain absolute and universal.
This deep dive shows that the Danish model is not a miracle. It is a successful anomaly, a high-tax society that achieves economic prosperity and high global competitiveness. It flies because of the highly synergistic interaction between market-driving flexicurity, comprehensive education, and robust redistribution, all resting on an essential foundation of massive, earned social trust.
Precisely. The system is compelling proof that social investment is a critical economic asset, not a drag on the economy. The security provided allows for business flexibility. The high-quality free education ensures a skilled, productive workforce. And the universality of services underpins the high social trust essential for economic collaboration and innovation. However, the analysis of the data is clear. To remain competitive and sustain its exceptional quality of life and high ranking in global measures of well-being, Denmark must reverse the worrying tendencies of the last 2 decades. It must urgently reinvest in the safety net to keep flexicurity viable, prioritize education to safeguard social mobility and future national competence, and increase the progressivity of the tax system to maintain social cohesion. The flying bumblebee is a marvel of engineering, but like any complex machine, it requires constant, deliberate investment and care to maintain the air currents that keep it successfully aloft.